All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're going deep into one of the most notorious teams in NBA history.
The Detroit Pistons bad boys.
Exactly. These guys were more than just a basketball team, they were a phenomenon. They brought a whole new level of intensity and grit to the league back in the late 80s and early 90s.
And they weren't afraid to ruffle some feathers along the way.
To put it mildly, we've got a ton of material to cover today, from their rise to championship glory to their controversial tactics and those epic rivalries that had everyone on the edge of their seats. So get ready for some aha moments, some jaw droppers, and maybe even a few laughs along the way.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Before we get into the Bad Boys era, let's set the stage a bit. The Pistons before Isiah Thomas and Chuck Daly were.
Well, they were a franchise searching for an identity.
They weren't exactly lighting up the league, were they?
Not even close. They had some decent players, but they lacked that spark, that winning mentality.
And then came the 1981 draft.
Ah, yes, the draft that changed everything for the Pistons.
They selected Isiah Thomas with the second overall pick.
And that right there was the turning point. He wasn't just a talented point guard. He was a leader, a floor general with this incredible competitive fire.
He had that it factor, didn't he?
Absolutely. He instilled a belief in that team that they could compete with anyone. He raised the bar, and his teammates responded.
But it wasn't all sunshine and roses right away.
No, it takes more than just one star player to build a championship contender. They needed the right coach, someone who could harness Isiah's energy and build a system around him.
Enter Chuck Daly.
The architect of the bad boys.
He came in 1983 and immediately emphasized defense, toughness, and physicality.
Which was a pretty radical approach at the time.
It was like he was building a team of enforcers, a squad that would punish opponents for even thinking about driving to the basket.
And he started attracting players who fit that mold perfectly. Guys like Bill Laimbeer, the ultimate agitator who loved to get under opponents' skin with his trash talk and physical play.
And then there was Joe Dumars, the silent assassin, an incredible defensive stopper, especially known for his battles with Michael Jordan.
And let's not forget about Dennis Rodman. He came along a few years later and took their rebounding and defensive intensity to a whole new level.
It was like they were assembling a team designed to intimidate and outwork their opponents.
Exactly. They were building something special, something that would change the NBA landscape forever.
And that brings us to the nickname that perfectly captured their essence. The Bad Boys.
It wasn't some marketing gimmick or a carefully crafted image. It just emerged organically from their style of play and their attitude.
The media started using the term, and the Pistons, they embraced it fully.
They even had that skull-and-crossbones logo, which was a pretty clear message to the rest of the league.
Talk about a visual cue for intimidation.
Oh yeah, you saw that logo on the opposing team's jerseys, and you knew you were in for a battle.
But beneath that tough exterior, they had serious talent. I mean, Isiah Thomas was a magician with the ball. He could score, he could pass, he could control the tempo of the game.
He was the heart and soul of that team, the leader on and off the court.
And Joe Dumars wasn't just a defensive specialist. He was a clutch scorer, a guy who could take over a game when needed.
And Laimbeer, for all his antics, was a force on the boards, a relentless rebounder who knew how to use his body to create space.
And Rodman, well, he was just a rebounding machine. He had this uncanny ability to predict where the ball was going, and he was always in the right place at the right time.
They had a supporting cast, too. John Salley, Adrian Dantley, Rick Mahorn, James Edwards, and later on Mark Aguirre. Each player brought something unique to the table, contributing to the team's success.
It was Chuck Daly's genius to bring all these personalities and talents together, create a system where they could thrive.
And that system was built on one fundamental principle: defense. 94 feet of defense, as they called it.
It was relentless. It was suffocating. It was unlike anything the league had seen before.
And it was both incredibly effective and incredibly controversial.
Yeah, some people called it revolutionary, others called it dirty. We'll definitely have to dive into that debate a little later.
Absolutely, because the Pistons' style of play had a profound impact on the NBA, for better or worse.
So how about we take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dig into those controversial tactics, the legendary rivalries, and the lasting legacy of the Detroit Pistons bad boys. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive into the nitty-gritty of the Pistons' 94 feet of defense. You mentioned it was both effective and controversial, so let's break that down.
Yeah, so the NBA in the 80s and early 90s, it was a much more physical game than it is today. Hand checking was allowed. There was a lot more contact.
So the Pistons weren't exactly playing in a touch football league.
No, they weren't. But even within that context, they pushed the boundaries. They were relentless. They were aggressive. They were masters of intimidation.
And they had some specific tactics that really got under opponents' skin, didn't they? You mentioned the hip check and the forearm shiver before the break.
Those were two of their signature moves.
Hmm.
The hip check, think of it like a running back trying to shake off a linebacker.
Yeah.
You use your hip to bump the offensive player off balance, disrupt their rhythm.
So basically make them think twice about driving to the basket.
Exactly. And then there's the forearm shiver. It was even more aggressive. You'd use a quick jolting forearm to the opponent's chest or back as they're making a move.
Sounds like it could border on assault.
Well, yeah, some opponents definitely felt that way. And even some fans and analysts questioned whether it was truly clean basketball.
So did the league ever step in and try to regulate these tactics?
Oh, they definitely noticed. The Pistons' physicality became a major talking point, and the NBA eventually had to make some rule changes.
So they actually changed the rules because of one team.
In a way, yeah. The Pistons' style of play forced the league to reconsider what was acceptable on the court. They didn't single out the Pistons specifically, but the rule changes were definitely a response to their aggressive tactics.
That's pretty incredible when you think about it. Their impact went beyond just winning games. They actually influenced the way the game was played.
Absolutely. And it's a debate that continues to this day. Did they revolutionize defense, or did they cross the line? Was it good, hard-nosed basketball, or was it dirty? It really depends on who you ask.
It's like they were walking this fine line between being tough and being reckless.
Exactly. And they embraced that image. They weren't afraid to be the villains. In fact, they seemed to thrive on it.
Like they enjoyed getting under opponents' skin.
Absolutely. They were masters of psychological warfare. They had those icy stares, they'd trash talk, they'd use every trick in the book to get an edge.
And speaking of getting under people's skin, we can't talk about the bad boys without talking about their legendary rivalries. These were more than just games. These were battles for supremacy, for bragging rights, for the soul of the Eastern Conference.
And it all started with the Boston Celtics. The Celtics, led by Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish, they were the kings of the East for most of the 80s.
So the Pistons were trying to dethrone the reigning champs.
Exactly. And those playoff battles were intense.
Yeah.
They were physical. They were emotional. They were everything that makes playoff basketball great.
It was like a heavyweight fight except with basketballs instead of fists.
Exactly. And one of the most iconic moments in that rivalry came in the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals, Game 5. Isiah Thomas hits a layup to put the Pistons up by 1 point with 5 seconds left.
So they're about to take a 3-2 series lead.
Right. But then Larry Bird steals the inbounds pass from Isiah and throws it to Dennis Johnson for the game-winning layup.
Heartbreak for the Pistons.
Oh, yeah. That play epitomized the Celtics' resilience, their ability to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
But the Pistons, they didn't give up. They kept coming back year after year, getting closer and closer to finally overcoming the Celtics.
And in 1988, they did it.
Yep.
They beat the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals to advance to their first ever NBA Finals.
So they finally slayed the dragon.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a win. They took the Celtics down in 6 games. They proved that they were the new force in the East.
A changing of the guard.
Absolutely. And to make a statement, they swept the Celtics in the first round of the '89 playoffs. It was like they were saying, we're here to stay and you're not stopping us.
Talk about sending a message.
They were letting the whole league know that the Pistons were the team to beat.
But then a new challenger emerged, Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls.
This was a rivalry for the ages, a clash of styles, a battle of wills, a matchup that would define an era.
It was the Pistons' grit and grind versus the Bulls' high-flying offense.
And in the middle of it all was this intense personal rivalry between Isiah Thomas and Michael Jordan.
Those two, they just didn't like each other, did they?
No, they didn't. There was a lot of animosity, a lot of pride at stake. And that added another layer of intensity to the rivalry.
And then there were the Jordan rules.
Ah, yes. The Pistons' infamous strategy for containing Michael Jordan.
It wasn't just about playing tough defense against him. It was about trying to break him mentally and physically.
The Jordan rules involved double-teaming him every time he touched the ball, hitting him hard on every drive, forcing him to pass the ball.
Basically make his life as difficult as possible.
Exactly. The idea was to frustrate him, wear him down, make him question his own abilities.
So were the Jordan rules effective?
Well, they were definitely controversial. But they were undeniably effective for a time. The Pistons managed to hold Jordan in check for a few years. They even beat the Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals 3 years in a row.
So they were the kryptonite to Jordan's Superman?
In a way, yeah. But the thing about Jordan was he learned from every challenge he faced. He used those losses to fuel his fire, to improve his game, to become even stronger.
And eventually he broke through.
He did. The Bulls finally defeated the Pistons in the 1991 Eastern Conference Finals and went on to win their first NBA championship.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
Right. The Bulls went on to dominate the 90s, winning 6 championships in 8 years. And the Pistons, their era at the top was coming to an end.
But they left behind a legacy that's still talked about today.
Absolutely. The Bad Boys, they changed the NBA. They changed the way the game was played, and they left us with a lot to think about.
So let's talk about that legacy in our next segment. We'll explore their impact on the game, their connection to the city of Detroit, and whether they were ultimately villains, heroes, or something in between. So the Bad Boys era came to an end. But their impact on the NBA lingered, didn't it?
Absolutely. Their legacy is complex and multifaceted. They left a mark on the game in ways that are still felt today.
All right, let's unpack that legacy. What were some of the biggest ways they changed the NBA?
Well, first and foremost, they brought 2 championships to Detroit. They put the Pistons on the map.
Before the Bad Boys, the Pistons were kind of an afterthought in the NBA.
Right, they were a small market team with a history of mediocrity.
And the Bad Boys, they changed all that. They brought a winning culture to Detroit.
They showed that a team built on defense, toughness, and grit could compete with anyone.
And win championships.
Exactly. And they did it their way. They didn't conform to the traditional notions of what a championship team should look like.
They embraced their villainous role. They weren't afraid to be physical. They weren't afraid to bend the rules.
And they backed it all up with results. 2 championships in a row, that's not a fluke.
So they brought a winning mentality to Detroit. They changed the perception of defense in the NBA.
They forced the league to adapt to their style of play.
And they helped shape Michael Jordan's career.
Oh yeah, you can't talk about the Bad Boys' legacy without mentioning their role in Jordan's development.
Jordan had to overcome the Pistons, had to conquer the Jordan rules in order to reach his full potential.
It's like they were the final boss in a video game. The ultimate challenge that Jordan had to defeat before becoming the legend he is today.
And they played a role in ending the Celtics dynasty, too. They were the ones who finally dethroned the Kings of the East.
They ushered in a new era in the NBA, an era dominated by physicality and defense.
It's amazing to think about the ripple effect they had on the league. Their influence can be seen in the way teams play defense even today.
It's true. The Bad Boys, they left a blueprint for how to win with a defensive-minded approach.
And their connection to the city of Detroit is undeniable. They embodied the spirit of the city, the toughness, the resilience.
They were blue-collar workers on the basketball court. They brought a championship to a city that was hungry for a winner.
And their legacy lives on in the Pistons' 2004 championship team.
That team, while playing a different style, had that same grit, that same determination, that same never-say-die attitude.
It's like the Bad Boys' DNA was passed down to that 2004 squad.
And it's still there today in the heart of every Pistons fan.
So the Bad Boys, they weren't just a basketball team. They were a cultural phenomenon. They were villains, heroes, and everything in between.
They left us with a lot to think about, a lot to debate. Were they pioneers of a new style of basketball, or were they simply dirty players? Did they elevate the game, or did they damage its reputation? These are questions that will continue to be debated for years to come.
And that's the beauty of their story. It's complex, it's controversial, and it's utterly captivating.
The Detroit Pistons Bad Boys. They were a team that changed the NBA forever. And their legacy will continue to inspire and provoke for generations to come.
Well, folks, there you have it. The Detroit Pistons Bad Boys, a team that redefined toughness, challenged conventions, and left an unforgettable mark on the game of basketball. They were a force to be reckoned with, a team that you either loved or hated but couldn't ignore.
And their story is a reminder that sometimes the most memorable teams aren't always the most likable. Sometimes it's the villains, the rule breakers, the ones who push the boundaries, who leave the most lasting impact.
So the next time you watch a basketball game and you see a team playing with an edge, with a chip on their shoulder, with that refuse-to-lose mentality, remember the Detroit Pistons Bad Boys? They were the ones who paved the way.
And they showed the world that sometimes being bad can be really, really good.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the Bad Boys era. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another fascinating story from the world of sports. Until then, keep those conversations going, keep those debates raging, and keep the spirit of the Bad Boys alive.